Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Jeffrey Blair, member of the 400 USA Director. And I just want to say good afternoon, everybody, as people start to join. Please let me know that you're there. As I see people join, I'll welcome you in. Welcome to Remember the 400, our international virtual conference, Paying It Forward for Future Generations. Let's talk about reparations. Let's talk about reparations. All right. So I see that we're live. I'm looking to see individuals coming in, hopefully. Let me know if we have individuals coming in so I can sort of get started. So when you actually come in, just say hi. Just say hello that you're here. Give me a thumbs up or something like that, just so I can be aware. All right, testing, testing. Do we have individuals joining us? Are we connected with the YouTube? Just want to make sure before we get started. All right. Okay. All right. If you're there, you're joining us on YouTube, definitely give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you are there so that we can connect. All right. Okay. So again, my name is Dr. Jeffrey Blair, member of the 400 USA Director. And we are here at part 2 of Paying It Forward for Future Generations. Let's talk about reparations. Part 1 was a very lively discussion with international panel. We just sort of scratched the surface. And so we thought it would be really good if we could do a part 2. Matter of fact, the attendance individuals demanded that we do a part 2 so that we can really dig into this, because there's not information you're going to get anywhere else. You're going to get this on CNN. You're not going to get this on Fox. You're going to get this on BBC or any of those items. You may get little pieces here and there, but really hats off to the Remember the 400 Foundation. Hey, Sophia, how you doing? Welcome, welcome. Yeah, definitely say hello, announce yourself, just so I can know that we have an audience there. We can really get started. But to put it all together, again, Remember the 400, providing this platform so that individuals in the Caribbean, individuals in the US, individuals in Canada, individuals in the UK can all be connected and be aware about what's happening, especially when it comes under this subject of reparations. Hey, Florence, welcome. Thank you for joining Remember the 400. Again, I'm Dr. Jeffrey Blair. I'm the director of the USA, and welcome to part 2 of our discussion on reparations. Okay, so reparations. Reparations is a hot topic, and just like under Remember the 400, their thing is looking at the past 400 years and seeing that since we've crossed that threshold of 400 years, there seems to be in a new chapter. And I think world events have told us that there's a new chapter, abroad, and I think it's really important for all of us to make sure that we're aware and watching what's going on and hear it from one another, so that it doesn't get muffled, it doesn't get diluted, so that we can kind of say from the horse's mouth, this is what's happening in my backyard. Here's how you can help me, even though we may not be physically connected, that we can be connected in our struggle for what we're trying to do. Hey, Naomi, hello, and thank you for joining this exciting discussion. So, we talk about reparations again at this juncture, in this new chapter past the 400. Reparations, first of all, we talk about what that even really means, the making of amends for a wrong one has done, the making for amends for something, a wrong that someone has done. Maybe paying money, otherwise helping those that have been, harmed by your actions. And so, like, in a court case, let's say many times, a criminal may be, ordered to pay restitution to a victim, so on and so forth. So it's not a handout. It's not, a nice to have or just a gesture. It's really about trying to reconcile damages that someone has done and bringing, some form of justice, for those that have been harmed. So I just really want to get there because then just a lot of times the discussions, it gets off into this, into these other tangents that are not really relevant to the discussion. So that's first of all. And also the second thing I'd like to bring is that there have been a lot of movement that's been taking place, whether we're speaking about the Caribbean, whether speaking about in Europe, in the US, I know in particular for sure, there have been some movements that have been taking place. So don't say nothing's happening. Things are happening. And I think the success of these things to continue to happen, to really get us to a particular outcome, is dependent on you and your participation. Again, making sure that your awareness, and then that you also are not asking but demanding that we move forward with the energy that's already been started. For example, in 2019, Evanston, Illinois passed the first reparations law in American history and is set to address decades of segregation and legalized housing and discrimination in Evanston, Illinois. And so they're making actual cash payments to residents, to Black residents that have been harmed due to the legal segregation laws that were passed, many years ago in Illinois. And that's something that's actually it's not a theory. It's actually in place, and people have actually started to receive some of those compensations. Bruce Beach, right? So for over 100 years ago, the local government in Southern California took Bruce's Beach away from Black owners because of the color of their skin. The owner's descendants recently won a long effort to regain that land. And it's worth over like $20 million. And the family actually won and received reparations for that. They got their land back. So these are just some examples, again, that there are some movements here that are taking place. Last week, we spoke with one of the panelists, which we will announce in a second, about even the task force that was created in California that studied this understanding of how California has harmed Black people, descendants of slaves, and free Blacks that were in California, and then proposed ways in which that they could actually, have restitution towards those harms that were posed. And so we're going to get an update to kind of see, where we are with that. And so these are things that are taking place in the movement. So again, hats off from the 400 creating this platform to, first of all, make us aware, but also give us opportunities then to say, what can we do to continue to push forward to ensure that we do realize this reparations are taking place in many, many areas that we're in. So first of all, let me introduce some of the members of our panel, and then the producer can sort of bring them on. First of all, Mr. John Dower, member of the Trevelyan family. John Dower is director working in film, television, and games, is a founding member of the www.hearsofslavery.org. And in 2016, he discovered his ancestors had been plantation owners in Grenada, receiving compensation in 1834 when enslavement was abolished in the UK. This began a 7-year journey to attempt to atone for his ancestors, becoming the first British family to present their apology to people of Grenada. Hello, Mr. Dower. Welcome again back to part 2 of this discussion on reparations.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. It's great to be here. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you. Miss Kamilah Moore, California. She was actually head of the California Reparations Task Force, which I mentioned earlier. Kamilah Moore is a reparatory justice scholar and attorney specializing in entertainment and intellectual property law. She earned a JD degree from Columbia Law School in New York City, a Master's of Law degree in International Criminal Law from the University of Amsterdam, a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Los Angeles, and is currently was appointed to California Reparations Task Force in 2021. Welcome, Miss Moore. Glad to get to talk to you again.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And also I have Mr. David Harrison, Vice President of the Orange County Voters League. Mr. Harrison has served the United States Air Force for 25 years. He currently works for the Orlando VA Healthcare System, Lake Baldwin campus in Orlando, Florida, and is currently active in his local community providing many services. Welcome, Mr. Harrison.
Dr. Blair, and to all, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Absolutely. And then also a new member of the panel is Mr. Stephen Golding. He's the president of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Jamaica. A professor of Garveyism, Golding chaired the Garvey Studies Department at the Hydel University in St. Catherine, Jamaica, and lectures on the philosophy of Marcus Garvey at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level. He was executively produced media content on both radio and television since the early 2000s, and he serves as a member of the Jamaican National Council on Reparations, as well as the Institute of Jamaica Council, and has served as the chairman of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica and the Jamaica Memory Bank. He is a graduate of Johns Hopkins University. Welcome, Mr. Golding. Thank you for joining us today.
Afternoon, Dr. Blair. Good afternoon to all of you and to your viewers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to make sure this is a robust discussion that we all can get involved in. I think that went pretty well last time. I'm definitely gonna be mindful of time to make sure we give everybody enough a space to be able to speak as well. And let me just welcome some other individuals that are here. Welcome Yvonne, welcome Doreen, welcome Tony Walker, welcome Kai Jackson. JM says excited about this discussion, also learning about updates on reparations now. Good. So we're all here. So let's dive in. Let's dive in. So let's start in the Caribbean because that is something that at least in my my social media that has been sort of, I've been getting a lot of feeds on that. I saw that Barbados had some meetings on reparations panel. I saw that President Guyana also he's speaking with the UN and different interviews about the need for reparations from the UK to the Caribbean and to the prior colonies. So maybe if you don't mind, we'll start with Mr. Golding and tell us a little bit about, I know I read your bio, but give us, sort of your summary of kind of like where reparations is from your perspective when it speaks with from the Caribbean and where it's going. Can you give us a little update on that?
Reparations has been a long time coming. It's been a long process. And, you have cases going back even as early as the 16th century. But in terms of the Caribbean, a lot of the movement you see going on now in the 21st century has really come about through the energy and the work of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which was formed in 2013 by CARICOM, which is the Caribbean community. That's our geopolitical bloc. Some of the islands have had formal reparation committees or commissions going back to 2007 on the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade in the British colonies or former British colonies. Some of these have gone from being a committee to being government councils to advising government. We've been organized, so to speak, as branches of the CRC. So from Bahamas right down to Grenada, along, the entire Caribbean community has been sort of energized by the CARICOM Reparations Commission and by their achievements. They are, of course, led by the chairman, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Sir Hilary Beckles, author of Britain's Black Debt, and somebody who, has been working in the diplomatic circles and getting good traction, particularly from the universities and from groups now like the Heirs of Slavery, the Repair Campaign and others. So it's been a long road. 30 years ago, if you talk about reparations, there were a lot of hecklers, a lot of people looking at you as if you're deluded or you're not serious. Yes. I think with the revelation in 2015 that the British Chancery had just paid off monies that it had borrowed to pay compensation not to the enslaved, but to the enslavers at the time of the abolition, created a perfect storm to galvanize the movement. And of course, now we have the North American, the National African American Reparations Commission in the United States as well. And we're looking forward to getting Canada on board too, as well as the Latin American countries.
Absolutely. Well, no, thank you for that. I think it's definitely is, like you said, a long time coming. I think it's important that we stay like this, connect to each other, because, a lot of times we don't get information about it unless it shows up on CNN or shows up on MSNBC or BBC. And even then, it's showed up almost not taken in a serious manner. I see some of the interviews and they're just like, it's not taken seriously. And so I think it's going to, in my opinion, it's going to move forward as when we continue to have that fight and stay focused on it and support one another in their efforts in order to make that happen. Again, we're representing the diaspora across, from, again, Europe to Americas to Caribbean, Latin America, so there's a lot of force here if we all work together to make it happen. So quite interesting. Any members on the panel want to chime in on kind of what their perspective, especially when it comes to the Caribbean's push towards reparations? Anyone on the panel can chime in.
I'll chime in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, I was going to say, let me add, Dr. Blair, that following that revelation in 2015 by the British Treasury, the martyrdom of George Floyd also did had quite an effect on the reparation movement, and sort of, helped us gain a lot of momentum over the period of the pandemic.
Interesting. Doreen had asked the question, are all islands part of the repair campaign?
All the independent islands, all the CARICOM states, which is about a block of 15 countries. Of course, we still have territories in the CARICOM, territories in the Caribbean that have not gained national independence yet. Territories like Martinique and Guadeloupe, St. Martin, British Virgin Islands. So those, because they are not formal members of the CARICOM community, may not have a formalized reparation committee that is in negotiation or, in touch with their government. But make no mistake, anywhere Africans were enslaved, there have been reparation movements and are reparation movements in those countries, whether you recognize them formally or not.
Yeah, for sure. And Doreen had mentioned CARICOM Summit was in Canada a couple of weeks ago. So I'm sure that was on the agenda. I think, Ms. Moore, were you going to chime in?
Oh, that was only if you all needed any other added contributions to that question. But yeah, sure. I'll just chime in by saying, I think the early tenets of Pan-Africanism, we talk about the 1900 Pan-African Conference. It was about African people, wherever they were situated, coming together to help each other with their specific and unique fights. And so I kind of see the global reparatory justice movement kind of in that same lens as that 1900 Pan-African Conference. So while reparations in the United States is for African Americans, those who are descendants of enslaved Africans who were forced to labor in these United States, we can also, assist our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean and South America with their specific fights as well. So that's all
Absolutely.
I was.
For sure. Yes. And so like for us who are, many of us are Caribbean descent, that are even in the States or in Europe or in Canada. So there's connection there. So Mr. Golding, what, for us that are not in Caribbean at the moment, what is it that we can do to support what is happening in the Caribbean and to ensure that movement continues forward?
First, let me say that we have to bear in mind that during the period of the European slave trade, or what they call the transatlantic slave trade, the Ma'afa, the African Holocaust, during that period, there was no Canada and United States, what's it not. We were cargo being moved all over. So we don't need to look at this through the prism of Jamaica's case or Grenada's case or African-American case or Afro-Caribbean cases, right? At the root of it, we're treating with that period of kidnapping, that period of unpaid labor, right? And a number of violations, whether we accept it or not, in international codes that existed at that time For example, the slavery that was practiced in Africa is not chattel slavery. And chattel slavery certainly would have violated the customary codes of how slavery was practiced in Africa. So I want us to understand that we have the same call for reparation, right? Even in the case of the United States, before they declared their independence, they were a British colony. That British colony enslaved Africans, right? Even coming into the War of Independence, when, you know, an offer was made to enslave Africans who fought for the British, right? That they would be given their freedom, which they did. But when the British ended up losing that war, they had the issue of what to do with these Africans now that they had freed from slavery, right? Some ended up in Britain and later went on to form the recolonizing process in Sierra Leone, right? Some of them ended up in Canada, in places like Nova Scotia. We have African freedom fighters in Jamaica who at one point in the late 18th century were deported to Canada. So, I mean, there are cases of reparation that join us together. Even the fact that, you know, it was a toss-up where the boat stopped, which ancestor you're from. We might all very well be related in this room, even though you're in Canada, you're in the United States, and I'm in the Caribbean. So I say this just because as the movement picks up momentum, we have to be able to reason and to plan together from that level of unity, understanding that the damages we are seeking during that period when the damage was done, there was no division or separation between us. We were all chattel, regardless of what port we were deposited at, and we were brought over on the same ships, right? But I think that is the trajectory of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. They were very much involved with helping to organize the African American Reparations Commission. I know in the United States, they have their own local cases, state by state. In fact, Robin Rue Simmons, who you prefaced by talking about what was done in Evanston, was here in Jamaica 2 weeks ago for a Reparation Film Festival, and she did a presentation. Excellent work she was doing. There are subtle differences in the approach. In the case of Evanston, they were using the proceeds from their marijuana sales. They're now also adding some of the real estate tax to that. California has a task force where they're now exploring how they would do this. CARICOM has taken a more frontal approach, beginning with letters that were written to the heads of those governments from those countries that participated in the European slave trade. Not just Britain, as we were a British colony, but for almost 200 years before that, we were a colony of Spain. In fact, the first African freedom fighters, because we have what I call African kingdoms in America. These are Africans who refused to submit to slavery, who escaped slavery, fought to maintain their freedom, who the British eventually had to sign a treaty with, recognizing their own rights and their own sovereign lands here within Jamaica. 250 years before we got our independence from them. Right. And that's not unique to just Jamaica. I mean, if you talk about Brazil, you have Quilombos, you have Palenques in Colombia. Excuse me, you have the Juca in Suriname. There are a number of African communities that were recognized as free communities during the time of slavery, right? Which is a testament to the fact that chattel slavery completely violated what the Africans knew about slavery, because you never hear of slave uprisings on the continent of Africa, and taking out. There were no Spartacuses, because slavery practiced in Africa was not the chattel slavery that was practiced in the Caribbean and in the North Americas.
Mr. Golden, real quick, not to cut you off, but I just want to make sure everybody has a chance to contribute. I think Ms. Moore, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, it's related because I know Vereen Shepard, who I think is the vice chair of CARICOM, I think she's going out on record saying, in the event that, reparations is meted out in the Caribbean, it's not going to be any direct cash payments. It's going to be to the entire countries. But what of note of what she said was, for Caribbeans who are not in the Caribbean, who are living in America, who are living in Canada, if they're not coming back to the Caribbean, they won't benefit from any reparations that CARICOM will negotiate between the European nations and themselves. And so I'm just curious about, I guess, the panel's thoughts, but particularly Stephen Golden's thoughts on that. And then just one editorial note. Rosewood, Florida was actually the first state-based legislation reparations for African Americans in the United States. The Rosewood Race Massacre, that's when in Rosewood, Florida, white Americans massacred Black Americans, and the Florida state legislature in the 90s actually paid out $500,000 pool of funds for the descendants of the Rosewood Massacre, $150,000 of lump sum payment for each of the 9 survivors, and individual $4,000 scholarships for the youngest generation of Rosewood family members. So a total payment of $2.1 million to the direct victims of the Rosewood Massacre and their descendants. So technically, I know in the mainstream media, people keep saying it's Evanston is the first, but technically it's not.
Thank you for that correction. I hate to push forward false information, so thank you for that correction on that. And I think, right now in the chats, there's sort of going back and forth about, as just to paraphrase, we are connected, whether we're in the United States or the Caribbean or UK, and therefore it needs to be a overarching collective effort to try to really push the powers that be to listen to us and to focus on it. While there are some of the strategies that were utilized, like, well, Americans need to focus on American institutions, Caribbean need to focus on Caribbean institutions, sort of that like divided focus, and so to me, my perspective, I don't think it's either or, right? I think it's and because it's necessary, for that. Like you said, there are connections all the way through, but then the mechanisms in order to elicit, redress, a lot of times do take a local thing. And also another thing, it's not just about formal slavery, but it's even after slavery, right? I mean, many of the things that's taken place, many of the harm that's been done, can more directly be traced and connected, at least from legal perspective of cause and effect, from the things that were done after slavery. Gentrification, the highway system, the taking of land, the eminent domain, the incarceration, so there's a lot that's there, and a lot of times those things, while the swell of force to demand reparations in all its forms needs to be collective, but sometimes the focus needs to be on this direct thing that was done to this specific subgroup of descendants of slaves. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think it's an either or. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Maybe Mr. Harrison or Mr. Dower can kind of give their thoughts on that perspective on.
There are times in which larger issues are intentionally broken down into micro issues instead of being addressed as the whole issue. It's a way to get around and not to actually identify, take responsibility, take ownership of what has been done, and then appropriate, responsibly in that matter. True. Thank you. For Rosewood, but it is a waiting game. How much longer can we wait folks out, especially when you have generations that may not have passed on that history, to be able to say it'll go away after a while and by, but there needs to be collective effort amongst communities, and with those communities still one beat, one sound. One voice, one sound, to keep it in the forefront. And in a place like Florida, it's going to be very interesting to make this happen, but it can if we come together as one. And it took a long time, over 200 years or so. It's going to take a little while, but we have to have persistence and consistency in our message. And then every community pull together to make this work.
Let me just read one of the comments. Black Contraband. If you cannot trace your heritage to slavery in a respective country, you cannot justify including other people groups into a claim. Yes, let's be respectful, but it's important to have this discourse. Thoughts on that comments, anybody?
I just wanted to make a comment about the complexity of this conversation from our perspective. We as descendants of enslavers in the Trevelyan family and other families that I'm associated with in the UK. Of course, our focus has been on the Caribbean because that's where our ancestors were essentially involved in the trade. So necessarily, in terms of things like apology, atonement, and talking about repair, we have been focused on the Caribbean. But of course, we are based in the UK. I mean, for example, in the case of Heirs of Slavery, the organization that we co-founded this year, Laura Trevelyan is based in New York, but the rest of us are based in the UK. And what's interesting from our perspective is when we go to UK reparations groups, they have quite a different perspective. And I'm beginning to understand the complexity of this in terms of the response we've had towards when we talk about CARICOM, because not all reparations campaigners in the UK are as respectful of CARICOM as we understood people were, particularly, of course, in the Caribbean. And so what we've noticed is just that I get that there's a feeling that people need to be clear about their backgrounds and involvement in particular islands or where they're from, particularly in Africa. But where they are in the world seems to be quite the opinions seem to differ quite a lot. So in the UK, for example, we definitely get a different perspective. We went to a reparations conference this weekend in London, this last weekend, which just goes to show that in the UK how much this is developing this conversation, because it's the biggest reparations conference that's been had to date, as I understand it. But there was a lot of interesting conversations about I wouldn't call it tension exactly, but potentially differences of perspective from those from Africa, from the Caribbean diaspora, and from people in the Caribbean. So I think it's a really complicated situation and a complicated conversation. So I mean, you guys all know this, right? But anyway, I'm just from our perspective in the UK, this is something we've noticed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. It's not an easy discussion any way around, right? No. All the way around. And so absolutely. And I my involvement, I don't know, going back maybe about 20 years, I remember that even the internal discussions and understanding of even how to approach or who to approach or where to go or how, or what are we asking for, or what, all those various things. It's, it's not a simple, easy discussion. And I think it takes time and effort to have individuals around the table to kind of understand it. And I think, going to this next question, that, given the push across the US to remove subjects of race and racism in America, from school curriculums and the end of affirmative action, post-secondary admissions, how important is it for people to be properly educated by the impacts of slavery and even post-slavery, on our current condition? How important is that? And I'm gonna push that towards a question to Mr. Harrison, as being in Florida, which unfortunately is the poster child for for this topic of banning books and banning curriculum. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, again, I've heard, you heard that term, everybody can have their own opinion, but you can't have your own facts. But they're trying to have their own facts. They're trying to remove the truth. And without the facts, it's hard to make a case, for reparations. So, Mr. Harrison, what are your thoughts on that? How important is education to even this discussion if not rightly educated?
My people perish because of a lack of knowledge. It has been concluded that through slavery, we acquired wonderful tools and trades even for us to be a supportive society. I guess when you don't know, there are so many African Americans that have had impacts on our societies, whether it be by education, whether it be affecting our communities at large. There has been a tremendous amount of African American influence go to a traffic light. African American. What I'm saying is that if we allow those things. And the governor is doing quite well in that. But that's when we, as a community, we, as a block of people, have to say, look, we don't have to worry about, or we should not consider ourselves making this a part of, per se, the public school system, or even we're even giving out vouchers so that people can choose to go to other schools, reducing the population in our public school system, whittling away at that foundation. We have, and one of the things that we're doing locally within the Orlando area, we're coming together with churches, and we're going to take this on ourselves. We, as a people, need to teach our history. If nobody else is going to, then we need to let our children know. We need to bridge that gap, because they may get it when they get to an HBCU. They may not get it. The bottom line is we've got to take back our communities, and our communities start with our parents. Our parents being vocal, as well as in those meetings, as far as with our elected officials. But also, we've got to, charity begins at home and then spreads abroad. And if we don't do it at home, it won't get done. And then collectively, as a community, we're going to spread out, not only with the local churches, but within our congresses, within our other religious organizations, to have the same footprint and continue that teaching. Because if we don't do it, who will? It's going to take some time. It's starting to get off the ground already. Our Congress of Christian Education from the for South Florida District Association is, by the beginning of January, we will have our classes set. And that's one of the things we're going to do in our congressional session, our Congress of Christian Education sessions. But also it's going to go down to the community churches as well. We're going to be on the same sheet of music, giving our children from the smallest to the oldest an opportunity to learn. You're here now. This is where you came from. Here's where you are. Let's plan on where you're going and never leave anybody else behind.
Mm-hmm. So what education? I think that was one of the suggestions out of the California Reparations Task Force, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Moore. How would you speak to that? The importance of education in this discussion.
Well, yeah, the first thing, just to mention what you were saying earlier in the opening of this question, or on the discussion, was around, there's this kind of like sentiment in this country where, we see race-based and race-conscious, even affirmative action policies under diversity rationale was just struck down by the Supreme Court June 29th of this year, literally the same day that the task force held our last hearing. And I'm mentioning that because a year prior, we invited legal experts like UC Berkeley Law School Dean Erwin Chemerinsky to help inform the task force around this 10-month debate that we had around who should be eligible for reparations when we're talking about the legacy of slavery in the state of California and even the United States.
So this is not a new debate for you.
No.
Even on people who are on the same team to try to get reparations, it's not an easy question to grapple with.
It's not. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. And then I was just going to add by saying UC Berkeley Law School Dean Erwin Chemerinsky predicted the outcome of the Supreme Court case a year prior and pretty much informed the task force very dispassionately, saying he didn't have a dog in the fight, but saying if you want to actually get reparations legislation passed in this climate, in this state, in this country, you're going to have to package your recommendations narrowly tailored, using constitutional language, narrowly tailored to descendants of slaves, not necessarily all Black people. And for me, that worked for me because, one, we want to make sure reparations actually happens in this country. We want to actually make sure that the material lives and conditions of Black Americans are changed for the better, and that will have a positive effect on other Black people as well. But then also when we're talking about who bore the brunt of the harm of slavery and its afterlife and its badges and incidents, it's descendants of slaves. So it was a win-win situation for me. And so that's why in that June 29th final hearing, it was a celebration. Even though that decision came down on the same day as our hearing, we were celebrating because we knew we were living to fight another day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the long game, right? So, Mr. Dower, your family came to the realization that your ancestors had owned slaves and actually received reparations when the slave trade came to an end. And then now in this organization that you have formed is to try to remedy that, or try to give some assistance. In your own words, you could summarize that. Tell a little bit about that piece of it and what type of response have you had? You kind of touched on a little bit, whether you're speaking about this in the UK or whether you're speaking about it in the Caribbean, I think Grenada, where your family had actually owned land and owned slaves. What type of response have you gotten from
enslaved?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can really only speak from the perspective of the UK because that's where I know. And what we did when we went and apologized as a family is that we went to Grenada, and we are now in the process of setting up a charity because that's the best way for us to effectively channel our reparations payments in future to different organizations in Grenada and the Grenadian diaspora in the UK. But in terms of
quick question on that, and just because again the complexity of this is kind of what so it's like to me. I see it in two parts. One is like, wow, there was a harm, and then accountability in some sense. I need to do something about it. Then the complex part is like, well, what? Like, how did you come about, or how did you explore just a little bit of here's our options. We could do this, so we could do that. We could do this, and how did you come to the conclusion that this is what we need to do, or the best way forward?
It was really important for us to make sure that we actually talked to people who were on the ground and knew what they were talking about. Otherwise there's a real danger of us kind of just doing this through ignorance and tokenistically. So we went straight to Hilary Beckles, who Stephen has mentioned earlier on, who is the vice chair of the University of the West Indies and also the chair of the CARICOM Commission, Reparations Commission. And we talked to him, and we got him to address our family. And he was incredibly useful, insightful, dynamic, all the things we know about Sir Hilary. And he really, I think, along with some reparations campaigners on Grenada itself, Nicole Philip Dow, DC Campbell, some other people, Ali Gill, who's the chair of the commission on the island. Those are people we listened to because we knew that we needed guidance. So yeah, I mean, I think that was really important. But just going back to your question about the UK, we've now since formed an organization called Heirs of Slavery. It's a very loose coalition of different families who also benefited from plantations, from plantation ownership and from the trade. And we are trying to do two things. One thing is to try and bring other families on board and say to them, look, guys, it's what you should do, and you shouldn't be scared. We will help you, we'll mentor you, we'll advise you, we'll support you. So we're about to have a conference in the UK about this coming up in order to do that. And we've invited lots of families who've contacted us, which I think is about building up a movement of families to go and pressurize bigger institutions. And the other thing we're doing is we are supporting reparations campaigners in the UK as much as we can in terms of our support and our we're in listening mode essentially.
Great, Mr. Golding, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to re-emphasize something you had said earlier. I mean, reparation is about repair, right? And because of the Africans' experience in the Western Hemisphere over the long time period, and because it institutionalized certain things like racism, repair has to be effected in many ways across a cross section of areas. For example, in Jamaica, as part of our Reparation Council, we also have a committee for internal reparations, because there's some things we realize have existed within our society that need to be addressed, that have come about because of the way government and society was formed around chattel slavery, right? So we've had to do professional developments with our educators to get them to embrace concepts like decolonizing our educational system. For example, we don't want the word slave written in our books anymore. We want to talk about enslaved Africans or people who were enslaved, because we realized the reference to slaves has dehumanized the ancestors for us over this period, right? Remember, African people were not the only people enslaved. Many people, the British were enslaved by the Romans at one point. But somehow in this time, because of the brutality, I suppose, of chattel slavery, that word has become synonymous with Black people. So we don't think of our ancestors anymore as people. We call them slaves. Our ancestors were slaves. No, your ancestors were not slaves. They were human beings who were enslaved. It's a subtle thing, but I give it to you as a demonstration how there's a number of nuances in there in our educational curriculum. We've had to do things like address the situation of Rastafarians who were persecuted by our government, persecuted by the colonial government, and it set a tone and culture that was continued by our own government after independence, and they suffered some atrocities. So we have paid reparations to them. The national government has done that, survivors of certain atrocities. I make the point to say that, you know, you're right. It's not just about slavery. It's also about the institutional harms that have been done successively over generations. But there are also some common grounds we can find too, because while every nation will have to deal with it in their own perspective, right? We have to deal with decolonizing our educational system. We have to repair what was done with our Rastafarians. We still have a law against what we call obia in Jamaica, and that law was made as a result to one of the large uprisings of enslaved Africans in 1760, right? We know it's a law that was created to contain Africans in enslavement, yet it is still on our books. We want to remove it. Not that we're promoting obia, but it's part of how we want to repair certain things that were introduced that haven't been addressed. So every nation will have to do that in their own right. But there are some common grounds and some common approaches that we need to take. For example, as you were mentioning with John earlier, at the point of abolition, the British government, and this is why what his family is doing is great, but it's not the complete answer. The British government must be made to answer, because they were the ones who moved this legislation that when they freed enslaved Africans, they were going to compensate the owners. So even at the point of abolition, the truth was right there in your face. It wasn't about recognizing our humanity, because you still paid for property, to free property. And the sad part is that you didn't have the money to pay it, so you had to borrow into the future. And so up to 2015, that means the Windrush descendants, Africans or Caribbean people who had moved to London, have been paying taxes basically to buy their ancestors out of slavery, if you get what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
That's a tragedy.
That is.
The British government, and particularly the monarchies of these countries, must be made to address that, because most of these countries, Netherlands, Spain, apart from France and Portugal, still have monarchies that are a direct link to that time and to legislations that were made at that time and to profits that were made at that time. And it was the same in America, I want to say to Miss Moore there. I brought it up with Ruth Simmons when she was here. At the time of the abolition of slavery in the United States, compensation was paid to the slave owners as well. Check it out, right?
In DC for sure. In DC for sure.
Spanish did it in Latin America. The British were not the first to do it, right? They were simply following a precedent that had been set. So whichever former colonies we are from, that's a common ground that we can approach this from. It has been successful for the Caribbean, because when you see the figures and there are records of it, who was paid what, how much they were paid, there are even records of the enslaved Africans that were owned by families like the Dowers or the Trevelyan's or so forth, right? And it's actually the exposure of these lists that have brought a lot of people's awareness to the point that they're willing to come to the table. So that can be done in the United States as well.
Real quick, Black Contraband had noted, question for John Dower: what is the sentiment of other descendants of enslavers you have met, is there a sentiment among that community to right the wrongs, or do they feel absolved due to time?
As you can imagine, it's a complicated question because there's a lot of families and a lot of people. But what I can answer is something more general, which is that since we formed Heirs of Slavery and put our website up, we've had hundreds of emails. And I'd say at least half of those are from families saying things like, oh my God, I've just found out. I looked at the Legacies of Slavery database as part of University College London, which is where we found out about our family's past. And they've said, we've discovered this and we don't know what to do. So I do think there is a sense that families, A, are becoming more aware. B, with organizations like us and the precedent we've set in the Trevelyan family and with the Gladstone family in Guyana recently, I do think there is change afoot. And therefore I feel optimistic that more families will join. It's not going to be anything quick. It's a painstaking kind of reckoning and trying to change people's attitude. And that takes a lot, and there's a lot of work to be done, but we're determined to do it.
Follow-up question: what is preventing those who descend from those who perpetuate the harms of slavery from taking the stance you're taking? What is behind the thinking of those who turn a blind eye?
I'm not sure whether people turn a blind eye. I think it's about cowardice, maybe one word, but I think it's about people. The thing is, in order to make this realization, I think to make an apology, you have to genuinely feel as though you have some sort of responsibility. And up till now, I think it's been easy for people to go, well, I'm not guilty because I didn't do it. Whereas for me, it's like, right. I have descendants, I have ancestors of whom I am ashamed. And I feel compelled to do something. It's about your moral code. So I would hope that is going to be a precedent that we've set, and I'm hoping that we'll be leading by example. But none of this is going to be easy, and I can't pretend it is. But we are determined to get the word out there, and I think by doing what we're doing, I'm hoping, and we're bringing those families along. But yeah. It's not going to be. It's not. I can't pretend it's going to be easy.
Yeah. So, I think one of the comments, and there's a lot of conversations in the chat, and we can't get to everyone. But one of the things sentiments that was mentioned is, we have these discussions, we talk about reparations, should do this, could do that, should do this, do that. But what I really liked about even our first discussion, even now, is that we talked about, well, yeah, we needed discussions, we need a table, everybody at the table, but here's some things that are actually happening. Here's some action that's taken place. Here's some successes or some challenges to actions that have taken place. So it's not just sitting around talking about it. So again, hats off to you again, Ms. Moore, again, for leading the California Reparations Task Force. I think last time you were here, and I want to give a chance for everybody else to talk about any things that's actually have been concrete pushes that have been happening. But Ms. Moore, and putting together that task force, as well as leading that out and coming up with the report, I think 1,000 pages of analysis of the problem, and even putting together solutions. And again, this isn't just a fly-by-night organization. This is backed by the state of California, the largest state in the country, as a blueprint of possibility, one ways of moving forward in the United States toward answering this question. So I think, if I remember correctly, the last time you guys did present the report. And I think the next step was the governor was supposed to sign it or look at it or consider it. Let me know where we are with that and what are the next steps since last time we spoke.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. And so the California Reparations Task Force, our official capacity as we serve the state of California was a legislative advisory body. So our role and responsibility was to advise the California state legislature on the types of reparations proposals that they should turn into legislation, debate, pass, and then the governor signed into law. And so where we are now that the task force is over, to your point, we submitted our 1,000-page final report to the state legislature. And now it's time for the state legislators to read, consume, study our report, read it with an open heart and mind, and start turning our proposals into legislation. The earliest that the majority of legislators can turn our proposals into actual state legislation will be around late winter, so like December 2023, early 2024, and we're going to see some debating around these proposals as early as this spring, and we could see Governor Newsom signing any given reparations legislation into law as late or early as October of next year, 2024. So 2024 is going to be a major year for the reparations movement, particularly in the state of California. The one last thing I'll conclude by saying is there's already one piece of legislation that has been introduced from our final report, and that's called SB 490. State Senator Stephen Bradford, who served on the task force, he's also an elected official. He was able to use a process called gut and amend to gut the original language of SB 490 to insert one of the final proposals from the reparations task force, which would create a new state agency called the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. And that agency would provide direct reparatory justice services to descendants of slaves in the state, from facilitating, for instance, free college tuition at Cal States and in the University of California, for instance. It'll have a business affairs office that will facilitate business grants to Black Americans who want to start businesses and sustain the businesses that they have. And there will be several other direct reparatory justice branches within that agency, but then it will also serve a dual function in providing necessary oversight to existing state agencies and even other institutions to ensure that Black Americans' rights, privileges, and immunities are not being abridged. Going to, that point of what reparations under international law, we know there's 5 forms, but that 5th form, guarantees of non-repetition. How do you get the state to guarantee to stop harming the victim group? And in this particular situation, we're talking about descendants of slaves. And I say descendants of slaves, can I just conclude? I say descendants of slaves because and I use it sometimes interchangeably with enslaved. I understand Stephen Golding's point, but I say it to pay homage to people who I look up to, like Martin Luther King Jr. His last book, Where Do We Go From Here? He said, who are we? We are the descendants of slaves. We are the offspring of noble men and women who were kidnapped from their native land and chained in ships like beasts. We are the heirs of a great and exploited continent known as Africa. We are the heirs of a past rope, fire, and murder. And then he goes on to say, I, for one, am not ashamed of this past. My shame is for those who became so inhuman, those Europeans, that they could inflict this torture upon us. And then lastly, I'll say Queen Mother Audley Moore, who's a Pan-Africanist, was the founder of Republic of New Africa, a movement to try to get the Southern states just for Black Americans. Before she created the Republic of New Africa, she created the organization called Committee for Reparations for Descendants of U.S. Slaves, and that was in 1962.
Oh, thank you for that update. And just to be clear, SP 490, is that law or is that proposed?
It's pending legislation.
Okay.
That the first opportunity for legislators to debate that legislation will be later this winter, but most likely January, February of 2024. So it has the ability to be law once Governor Newsom signs it into law. And the latest he can do that would be around September, October of 2024.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that. From Doreen, do you think this reparative action will actually trickle down to the little guys in the communities? So, again, as example, forming the agency, again, paying a nod to the Freedmen's Bureau, coming out of after the Civil War, again, you know how it is. Things can be passed, agencies can be created. If they don't have the funding, if they don't have the teeth, if they don't have the backing, those type of things. Do you imagine that it will actually, the guy on the street will be able to actually see benefits coming out of this if this passes? I think is summarizing, adding a little bit to Doreen's question. What are your thoughts on that, Ms. Moore?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that follow-up question, because it reminds me one of the other branches that will be in this proposed agency is a genealogy branch that board certified genealogists would be hired to be in that agency to assist Black folks in being able to receive the ample amount of benefits that will be housed in this agency. Because the idea is, this burden of proof of tracing your lineage or your heritage to an enslaved African in the United States, it should not be on African Americans. It shouldn't be on the victim. It should be on the state in responsibility, in recognizing the responsibility of the harm. And so just to conclude briefly, I'll just say the task force, when we were deciding who should be eligible, we actually had 2 public hearings on this issue, and we invited 6 genealogists to talk about the feasibility of this lineage standard. And you would assume that because they're genealogists, they would all say, yes, let's do a lineage standard. But it was a really hard conversation, and the genealogists were going back and forth, really wrestling and tussling whether this lineage tracing idea was very feasible. And we ended up doing a poll, having the genealogists vote at the end of their expert testimony, and 5 of the 6 said, you know what, lineage tracing is feasible. Here are some resources and some ways that the state can do it to make sure that everyone who is eligible can benefit.
Thank you for that. All right, so quickly, let me just follow up with the other panelists. So, Mr. Harrison, in Florida, what you're doing there, what are some things that are in the pipeline, and what are some things that maybe any of us can maybe help us support, even though you may not be in the state of Florida?
Well, there's a lot that's going through my mind right now, and I'm absorbing all of this. And I'm going to go to my local officials. My local officials need to know, even though I don't live in Orlando anymore. I moved to a different county because I still support the Florida Voters League, but I still have very close connections there to be able to move those elected officials to have a seating with them and move this upward. It's got to come from Orlando and then move its way up and through our committees when they have their legislative committees. I have one of the councilmen, Mr. Frost. I'll be reaching out to him. We're gonna go move up, and we're gonna go top down and meet in the middle in order that we may be able to move this forward. It's going to be very difficult because we are definitely a minority, but that doesn't mean that we have a minority energy. We will be victorious. It's going to be a little bit of a haul, but that is going to be the beginning, starting with our local councilman, and then taking it from there to our state leaders, which are in the minority again. That happens, and in this educational portion, this is why it is so important that we let our voices be heard when it's time for us to vote. Mm-hmm. Because unless you have people who are sensitive and compassionate and that have no agenda, it makes it more difficult. And by both houses being lopsided, it's going to be an upward challenge, but it can be done. And the main thing is for us not to get discouraged with it. And again, that is my plight right now. And we're going to keep at this. We're going to keep chipping away at it because the change will come. It's going to come.
Absolutely.
So I may not see it. I'm getting more snow under my chin than what I started with. But that is my goal. That is my desire, and that's my commitment.
Absolutely. Mr. Golding, how about yourself? To let us know in closing, sort of what's down the pipe for your organization, and what are things that we can do to assist in any way that we can.
You know, as I started with, the fight has been a long time coming. From the Maroons to Equiano and the Sons of Africa, to Marcus Garvey's Declaration of Rights, to the League of Nations, to people like Queen Mother Audley Moore, and the Vereen Shepherds, the Hilary Beckles, the CARICOM Reparations Commission. This fight has taken successive generations over centuries. I think at this point now that we are sort of gaining critical mass and amazing things are happening. I mean, congrats again to John. Wonderful initiative, pioneering, and we really bank on it, setting a strong example to others, which is why I'm encouraging the American legislators to look into that compensation, look into the history books, just as how UCL did it. I'm sure it can be done in the United States, but it's happening in other institutions, Princeton Seminary, Georgetown University, University of Glasgow. There have been heavy academic and some religious institutions are joining the fray, the fight now, and trying to come up with means of reparations. Some of them have asked us to prove descendancies to particular enslaved Africans. Some have, said, it has to be for education and research. We have to take a multi approach because there are going to be many levels, and because it's opening up in so many areas. For example, the areas of slavery, John may very well encounter in Grenada people with the name Dower, who can directly trace their lineage to people enslaved by his great grandparents, granduncles, or what's it not. They may have to have an individual case to sit down with John about, and it may work out differently for them. Not everybody should be looking to receive a check in hand. And this is why it's important that governments are brought to the table, particularly the governments of countries that are predominantly of African descent, right? And that not John and others like him answering back to them, but their governments taking responsibility. So there has to be some government to government interaction. And this is what the CARICOM 10-point plan guides in terms of what the ask is. The first is an apology, which not all of us agree with, but it's there. Transfer of technology, cancellation of debt. The issue of repatriation is also there. What we are trying to do now is continue to put wood on the fire, to build up the steam for the engine, to keep the momentum and increase. We're looking to create spaces for the exchange of ideas. And so that, for example, we look forward to next year being a part of what is going to be the Queen Mother Audley Moore annual lecture, hopefully at the Schomburg in New York. It will create a platform, not just to talk about the African-American experience, but for example, maybe we would host John speaking about his own experience. I mean, that may touch some American families in a way that you may generate all kinds of responses in the United States. So that's really what we're about now, maintaining the unity of the movement, exchange of ideas, helping to create platforms that we can propel it forward, bringing governments to the table. And it's been, let me say again, did I say it's been a long time coming? Yes. We've heard it's unfortunate. For centuries, we've been looking for an apology. One just came earlier this year from the Dutch government, and we're expecting more will follow. But that apology is something we've been asking about since the abolition, right? So things are happening right now. It's important that we stay together.
There's a stirring,
yes. Right? And that we learn from each other's experiences, as I'm trying to share with Kamilah. And I must say that the idea of the marijuana revenues in Evanston is something I've been speaking with my own reparations council about, for the fact that so many Jamaicans were locked up and persecuted for cultivation of marijuana, particularly Rastafarians in the early day. And it's because of that we had that internal reparation dialogue going on. So there are various aspects to this thing. More people are coming on board now. Naysayers are now waving the flag. So, old foots like myself, who've been talking about it since being a college student in the 90s and having a whole room tell you, oh, sit down, you're crazy, it's never going to happen. We're glad to be here when all of this is going on.
Absolutely.
And we get much satisfaction from seeing where the movement is today.
Yes, seeing and participating. What they say, people, the three types of people, right? People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who say, what happened? We don't want to be that third group. Hey, I want to thank the panel for taking time out of your busy schedule to be able to be a part of this. And we thank you so much for your input. It's been very enriching to me, and hopefully everyone else that's been in attendance, hopefully yourself as well. Like you said, it's about sharing information of what's happening. Make sure the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. I asked one other thing, humbly, to all the panelists. Please keep Remember the 400 and us as a part of your list of things that are happening. Let us know. those events that are happening, we want to come and be a part of that. We have representatives from all over the world. And so we want to come and support whatever's happening in the Caribbean, in New York, in the UK, in Florida, and in Canada. Just let us know. We want to come and support this thing. Like you said, only through collective unity will we be able to be successful, not to ask or request, but to enforce and make sure that we accomplish the thing that we need to do to assist. I think that also is a part of reparations, us working together for the common good. And also, you know, and we just said, hey, part 3 is like, well, not necessarily part 3, but I think we definitely will, I know Member 400 will be able to use this platform for maybe even a pointed discussion on one other sub aspect, you know, related to this. I think it's definitely on the table. So please let us know if we can be an assistance in that way as well as helping to utilize this platform for something that you may be working on locally as well. I want to thank everyone who's joined us and took time out here as well. I couldn't get to every question, but again, I would say also one other thing. The different documents you mentioned, for instance, the 10-point plan. I think we already have the California Reparations Task Force document. Please forward it to us, Member 400, so that we can sort of keep those things there. So people are maybe referring to things. We can also share that information to individuals so they be aware and be able to read some of the information themselves. So any of those links or documents you may have, please share them with us as we want to continue to help amplify it any way that we can. Yeah, I know we need a part 3, but we want to just keep the general conversation. We want to wait until there's something to really talk about or focus on that's action orientated in order to do that before we do that. That's my perspective. Thank you, Doreen, as president of Member 400. Thank you to Shadrach Porter for initiating this way back in 2017. I think, you know, we're definitely reaping the benefits from it. And again, reparations is happening. It's not just a theory. We're not just talking about it. There are things that are happening in so many different corners. And so I think it's important for us that, you know, again, we want to make sure you're aware, but also have an opportunity to participate. So keep in touch. Until then, thank you guys, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Take care. Thank you. God bless.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.